Okay, thanks, Dave. I've tried to time this out so that we have a good amount of time to discuss anything at the end, and questions up till today and also from today. So, um, in the finest tradition of corpus linguistics, Justice Scalia's historical research brings him back to the glorious revolution of 1688 England. This is his historical research that becomes the foundation for the Heller decision. Now, what I want to highlight is that in it, he skips past, he bypasses the 20,000 year history of Native Americans on the North American continent. Black people and Native people are invisible to Scalia. That history, however, continues haunting us today. Okay, where did you go?
We did not ask you white men to come here. We do not want your civilization. We would live as our fathers did, and their fathers before them. In 1492, the indigenous Arawak people of the Caribbean islands encountered Christopher Columbus of Spain. Columbus wrote in his log, "They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want." Columbus proceeded to unleash a reign of terror unlike anything seen before. When he was finished, 8 million Arawaks, virtually the entire native population of Hispaniola, had been exterminated by torture, murder, forced labor, starvation, disease, and despair. Columbus's atrocities with cross and sword were justified by the Christian doctrine of divine discovery and set religious and legal precedent for the invasion and genocide of America's indigenous peoples for the next 500 years and beyond. By 1650, a precarious relationship between the First Nations of the East Coast of North America and New England colonists was collapsing into slaughter and enslavement of native people by settlers who wanted more land and wealth. We find that most of the English colonies sanctioned and encouraged scalping Indians. In 1776, the United States birthed the first 13 states on land taken through the ethnic cleansing of dozens of eastern seaboard tribes. The Declaration of Independence further enshrined the belief of Euro-American settler supremacy by declaring native peoples to be merciless Indian savages. In 1787, the United States adopted its Constitution. Article 6 established treaties as the supreme law of the land. Despite this supreme law, treaties with sovereign native nations became slippery promises, easily broken when convenient. In 1823, in the case of Johnson and Grand Lessee v. McIntosh, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that the First Nation people's right of occupancy was subordinate to the United States' divine right of discovery. The United States has unequivocally agreed that discovery gave an exclusive right to extinguish the Indian title of occupancy. This landmark ruling provided legal cover for governmental policies that would claim white Euro-Christian supremacy as justification for stealing indigenous lands and for the genocide of native peoples. In 1849, the California gold rush triggered the mass western migration of settlers, putting them in direct conflict with existing indigenous nations. In 1851, anxious to protect white settlers on their way to California and to avoid a full-scale war with the Lakota and our allies, the United States requested the Treaty of Fort Laramie with the Sioux and other northern Great Plains nations. 6 Sioux men signed the treaty, which recognized the Lakota Nation's sovereignty over a vast territory amounting to approximately 5% of the continental United States. With the end of the Civil War in 1865, the United States sent its war-hardened soldiers on a crusade to settle the West. Led by the growing dogma of manifest destiny, the U.S. claimed the God-given right to expand its borders from sea to shining sea. Hail any man who sympathizes with Indians. I have come to kill Indians and believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill them. In 1868, unable to defeat the warriors of the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho nations fighting to protect our lands and people, for the first time in its history, the United States appealed for peace and drafted the Second Treaty of Fort Laramie. The treaty established the Great Sioux Reservation, including the Black Hills, and unceded Indian Territory, to be set apart for the absolute and undisturbed use and occupation of the Indians, and that no white person or persons shall be permitted to settle upon or occupy any portion of the Indian Territory. Unable to defeat our free Lakota people with military might, the U.S. government increased the use of deceptive practices to subvert our matriarchal system and to create the appearance of agreement when our lands and rights were stolen. It is my purpose to utterly exterminate the Sioux. They are to be treated as maniacs or wild beasts, and by no means as people with whom treaties or compromise can be made. Just 3 years later, in 1871, the U.S. government ceased to recognize Indian nations as sovereign and independent with the passage of the Indian Appropriation Act. This legislation legalized the theft of our treaty-protected lands and further threatened our way of life with our buffalo relatives. The civilization of the Indians is impossible while the buffalo remain upon the plains. The mass slaughter of our buffalo relatives, the Tatanka Oyate, lasted from 1871 until 1910. In just the first 7 years, buffalo hunters decimated the great herds of buffalo nearly to extinction. The U.S. Army encouraged the slaughter by providing free ammunition and supplies. In 1873 alone, buffalo hunters massacred more than 1.5 million buffalo. As planned, our people became increasingly dependent on the U.S. government for even the most basic of human needs, like food, clothing, and shelter. In 1874, after illegally trespassing on Lakota territory, General George Custer publicly announced the discovery of gold in the Pahasapa, the Black Hills. As intended, the announcement unleashed a flood of miners and prospectors into the Great Sioux Reservation in violation of the 1868 treaty. In 1875, the U.S. demanded we sell the entire Black Hills region. We refused. The U.S. declared this an act of war and launched a massive invasion of our lands to annihilate our people. Nothing short of their annihilation will get the Black Hills from them. On the 25th of June, 1876, in the Battle of the Greasy Grass, or Little Bighorn, the Sioux Nation, along with our Cheyenne and Arapaho relatives, won a great victory over General Custer and the elite 7th Cavalry. On that day, we defeated the might of the U.S. Army and took their flag. Seeking revenge for their defeat, the U.S. Army directed Colonel Randall Mackenzie to unleash total war. U.S. forces went from village to village, killing women, children, and ponies, and destroying teepees, clothing, blankets, and food supplies. The U.S. then launched a sell or starve policy and withheld rations to coerce our people to sell the Black Hills and to relinquish our sovereign rights. These inhuman atrocities forced the surrender of many Lakota people to the U.S. agencies by spring of 1877.
Now, I wanted to show you all of that because I want to emphasize that if Scalia took his history research, extracted it from it being part of a legal opinion, and simply submitted it as an article to appear in a journal about the Second Amendment and the historical background to it. And if he had sent that somehow, that it got routed to me, which of course it wouldn't because I'm not a PhD person. But if he did, I would do what the scholars do when they are vetting a proposed paper. They look at it and they say, are you missing significant information if you're going to be talking about the history underpinning the Second Amendment? And here is Scalia talking about what went on in 1688 in England. And I'd have to say, stealing the Indian lands, betraying treaties that you made, massacring people all across the plains, killing their buffalo, that would be significant information that you kind of just can't skip by if you're going to be writing a history. Now, it's important to know that, as I said, natives and black people were invisible to Scalia. Natives, however, were not invisible to George Washington, the father of our country. However, as indicated in a history book from, I think this is 2007, highlights George Washington's propensity for genocide. It may come as a surprise that in Iroquois country, Washington is no hero. To this day, the term Holocaust in Iroquois country is taken to mean the series of raids by General John Sullivan and his associates under Washington's orders during 1779. Town destroyer is a name commonly used for Washington. Father of one country, scorcher of another. Such an image of Washington is difficult for some people to accept in the context of a history awash in myth about him. In the genteel lexicon of the non-mythical Washington, the destruction of roughly 60 Iroquoian towns and the burning of their farm fields in 1779 was euphemized as chastisement. Washington never seems to specify exactly what they had done to merit the final solution that he called the rod of correction. But he ordered Sullivan to cut off their settlements, destroy next year's crops, and do them every other mischief which time and circumstance will merit.
Judy, can you come here?
What was it? Someone calling here?
I'll take care of it.
Okay, all right.
In the midst of the American Revolution, the Haudenosaunee Civil War began. On August 6, 1777, Oneida fighting men and their American allies clashed at Oriskany Creek with British troops and their Seneca and Mohawk allies. At day's end, hundreds lay dead on the battlefield. As the war raged across the eastern continent, Mohawk and Seneca forces allied with the British wreaked havoc on frontier settlements, draining American economic and military resources away from the war effort. In retaliation, George Washington sent an army against the Haudenosaunee capital at Onondaga. One nation still clinging tenaciously to neutrality. After Washington's army ransacked the capital, the Onondaga also plunged angrily into the war on the side of the British.
You call George Washington the father of your country. We call George Washington Hanadagaius, which means town destroyer.
In August 1779, Washington sent General John Sullivan into Haudenosaunee country with 5,000 men. Entering territory few white men had ever even seen, Sullivan carved a chilling swath of destruction, forcing those in his path to flee their homes. Sullivan's soldiers could not help but marvel at the prosperity of the deserted towns they were destroying.
We reached a town which consisted of 128 houses, mostly very large and elegant.
The Indians lived much better than most of the Mohawk River farmers. Their houses very well furnished with all necessary household utensils, great plenty of grain, several horses, cows, and wagons.
It appears to be a very old settlement. There are a great number of apple and peach trees here, which we cut down and destroyed.
A group of Haudenosaunee mercenaries who guided Sullivan's army into the territory were captured by the Seneca. One man recognized his own brother among the captives.
Brother, you have merited death. When those rebels had drove us from the fields of our fathers to seek out new homes, it was you who would dare to step forth as their pilot and conduct them to the doors of our homes to butcher our children and put us to death. No crime can be greater. But though you have merited death and shall die on this spot, my hands shall not be stained in the blood of a brother. Who will strike?
A Seneca chief killed the prisoner instantly. But even the powerful Seneca could not stand against Sullivan's massive army. Old and young grabbed what few possessions they could carry and fled.
A part of our corn they burnt and threw the remainder into the river. They burnt our houses, killed what few cattle and horses they could find, destroyed our fruit trees, and left nothing but the bare soil. What were our feelings when we found that there was not a mouthful of any kind of sustenance left? Not even enough to keep a child one day from perishing with hunger. Tigawanas, Seneca.
In retaliation for the American destruction of Onondaga, Mohawk, Seneca, and Cayuga villages, Joseph Brant attacked the Oneida and neighboring Tuscarora, allies of the Americans. In the end, all of the 5 nations were ravaged. Out of scores of Haudenosaunee towns, only 2 survived unscathed. And it was already fall, with no way to replace the lost crops. The tragedy heightened with the coming of winter, American Revolution.
Okay. And so my point is to try to highlight that, for me, I think that genocide, killing off any food supplies, all these attacks and murders on Native Americans, that it's reasonable to believe that they might want to fight back. And for the colonists, what they had to fight back with was the militia. So the militia takes on an importance and a role that I don't know how you skip by that. The militia was there to fight the Indians and to be able to fight any slave rebellions. That's the essence of the militia. But I want to go, this is the decision. This is Justice Scalia's treatise on the Heller decision. But I want you to show you something. I can do a word search through his decision. Let's look at Indians. There are 4 references to Indians. All of these references appear in the dissent, not in Scalia's opinion. They don't exist. And what we get are Indian tribes such as Shays. Let me get you over to the. Any self-defense interest at the time of the framing could not have focused exclusively upon urban crime-related dangers. Again, this is coming from the dissent against Scalia. 200 years ago, most Americans, many living on the frontier, would likely have thought of self-defense primarily in terms of outbreaks of fighting. Let me get this back here. With Indian tribes, rebellions such as Shays' Rebellion, marauders and crime-related dangers to travel on the roads, on footpaths. I mean, understand that, yeah, you're right. They would have been concerned about Indian attacks. And then we have footnotes that are there just simply giving references. But again, all of this is from the dissent. Let's take a look at fear, okay? Was there any fear? We have fear. This is Justice Scalia talking about fear. Let me see. They also underscored, hang on, let me try to move this up. Underscore the profound fear shared by many and that era of dangers posed by standing armies. The reason for the militia was to not have standing armies. He's not talking about the fear of having, your throat cut by Indians because you just killed their children. That's not what's there for him. Some more. Again, during the 1788 ratification debate, the fear that the federal government would disarm the people in order to impose rule through a standing army or select militia was pervasive in the anti-federalist rhetoric. Well, again, yes, there is the debate about a standing army, and well, we don't want one of them because that costs too much. So we're going to have a militia. And so the militia was going to serve as the protective edifice. And, we go on, but he's not getting into any of the, and then what happens is when we get further on, we're into the dissent. So again, these are words that just don't, let's look at the code in, this is the Indian tribe that we just watched a video about, the Haudenosaunee. That's the Iroquois. Group of tribes joined together under one confederacy. Nowhere in his decision, none found. We can get into, I plan to get into some others later on, but let's just look at slaves. There are 3 mentions of slaves in Scalia's decision. In a famous fugitive slave case, he talks about. And he says, in the aftermath of the Civil War, let me make sure, yeah, this is an outpouring of discussion of the Second Amendment in Congress and in public discourse as people debated whether and how to secure constitutional rights for newly freed slaves. The question there is, are we going to give them weapons? The whole reason we have a Second Amendment is to have a militia to put down insurrections and rebellions. And who are we afraid of? We're afraid of the Indians and the enslaved people rebelling. So what I'm saying is he has an opinion that totally eliminates reference to slavery, slave rebellions, Native Americans counterattack against Americans, using the militia to go and fight them. None of that is included in Scalia's decision. Now, I want to also go to, this should be right here. No, got the wrong one. Here it is. Okay, here is the Constitution and its amendments. Let's, Scalia talks a lot about citizens' militia. We have to have access to weapons. Otherwise, the citizens' militia would not be able to rise up against a tyrannical government, which is not in the Constitution. Citizens' militia. We couldn't find what you were looking for. But wait a minute, Justice Scalia made that a part of his analysis, suggesting that the Constitution authorized a citizens' militia. Not there. There's no such thing.
Yeah. Sal, that's not the video that's showing.
It's not. Okay.
It's like it's Biden and Trump is on there.
Okay, let me try the, let me get the right one here. Second Amendment. Ooh, I thought I changed it. Okay. Sorry. Okay, should have the Constitution there.
Constitution of the United States, a transcription.
Okay, so what I'm doing is I put in citizens militia to do a search to see if the document contains those words. It's not there. I go in and I ask it to tyranny, fight against tyranny, right? It's one of the things that he says it's there for. Again, they can't find it. The word is, it's not in the Constitution. Words that he weaves into his decision, making it appear that the Constitution said this, are words that are not in the Constitution. And I can't believe that that happened by accident. Okay. But let's just take, what do we have on militia? This is where it is telling Congress that it has the authority to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions, to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia. And it is, you can call forth the militia to suppress insurrections. If you are going to take up weapons against a tyrannical government, that is an insurrection. So what Scalia is saying is that the Constitution gave people a right to a weapon so they could rise up against a tyrannical government, and the Constitution authorized Congress to call forth a militia to put down insurrections. I can't believe he doesn't see that contradiction. It's I'm sorry, but it's bogus. It's bogus. And all of this is about, you know, this segment. Okay. And so let me get to my next one. I want to go directly to 500 nations. Share that one. Oh, okay. And so it's important to keep in mind that what was going on at the time of the American Revolution, control of slaves, continual encroachment upon the natives, backing them into a corner to take away more and more of their lands. And what was happening is the Native Americans were not just starting, but gathering more steam to want to fight back. And we're going to hear about Tecumseh.
Lands of the powerful Haudenosaunee nations were shrunk to little more than reservation islands. The front lines of the invasion moved west to the nations of the Ohio Valley, the Lenape, Shawnee, Miami, and others. Settlers flooded west, many of them Revolutionary War veterans paid with land grants by the government left bankrupt from the war. Supported by the new United States, they came prepared to fight for the land.
People of our frontier carry on private expeditions against the Indians and kill them whenever they meet them. And I do not believe there is a jury in all Kentucky who would punish a man for it. John Hamtramck, Major, United States Army.
Over the next 20 years, through a series of battles and dubious treaties, the new United States laid claim to Indian lands on the frontier. Vast tracts were ceded to white settlement, including the future sites of Detroit, Toledo, Peoria, and Chicago. Shaking with emotion, 1,000 tomahawks brandished in the air.
What happens is they fight these Indian wars. They don't have money left. They have to pay the people who fought for them. And what they're doing is they're compensating them by saying, go take those lands that are occupied by Native Americans, and we'll help you go and fight and kill them so you can take it away. This is far more important than what happened in 1688 in merry old England. So Tecumseh starts to try to rally the native tribes to fight back, but it's too late. It's important to understand, as these things are happening and your world is turned upside down, and if there's a point where you can stop it, but then there's a point where it's too late. And that's a question for us to think about in terms of our contemporary events.
William Henry Harrison, governor of the Indiana Territory, recognized Tecumseh's personal power and charisma and saw the Shawnee leader as a singular threat.
The implicit obedience and respect which the followers of Tecumseh pay to him is really astonishing, and more than any other circumstance, bespeaks him one of those uncommon geniuses which spring up occasionally to produce revolutions and overturn the established order of things. If it were not for the vicinity of the United States, he would perhaps be the founder of an empire that would rival in glory that of Mexico or Peru. Governor William Henry Harrison.
Prophetstown's population swelled. But despite Tecumseh's growing influence, he could not control the actions of all Indian leaders. In 1809, at one of many treaty conferences, Governor Harrison convinced leaders of the Miami, Lenape, and Potawatomi to sell 3 million acres of land in Indiana and Illinois. Tecumseh was outraged, considering those who signed the treaty guilty of treason.
No tribe has the right to sell a country, even to each other, much less to strangers. Sell a country. Why not sell the air, the great sea, as well as the earth? Did not the Great Spirit make them all for the use of his children?
Tecumseh went to Harrison and, in a volatile meeting, confronted the governor face to face.
Brother, I look at the land and pity the women and children. I am authorized to say that they want to save that piece of land. We do not wish you to take it. It is small enough for our purposes. I want the present boundary line to continue. Should you cross it, I assure you it will be productive of bad consequences.
But the settlements continued to expand, even onto the newly ceded lands. Tecumseh was convinced that only force would stop the American advance. To build a military resistance, he continued to travel tirelessly among the nations of the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley, while Harrison kept a nervous eye on his movements.
No difficulties deter him. For 4 years, he has been in constant motion. You see him today on the Wabash, and in a short time you hear of him on the shores of Lake Erie or Michigan or the banks of the Mississippi. And wherever he goes, he makes an impression favorable to his purpose.
In 1811, Tecumseh traveled south in an effort to bring the powerful Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Creek into the alliance. There, in village after village, he argued that Indian nations stood at the brink of disaster.
Where today are the powerful tribes of our people? They have vanished before the avarice and oppression of the white man, as snow before the summer sun. Will we let ourselves be destroyed in our turn without making an effort worthy of our race? Shall we, without a struggle, give up our homes, our lands, the graves of our dead, and everything that is dear and sacred to us? I know you will say with me, never, never.
But Tecumseh's passion and presence alone could not overcome a growing cultural rift. Many Southern Indian leaders were encouraging their nations to emulate mainstream white society. Others saw military conflict with the U.S. as suicide. Although Tecumseh found passionate supporters everywhere, his hope that Southern nations would join in a unified resistance was not to be. In January of 1812, Tecumseh returned to Indiana to find Prophetstown destroyed, its people dispersed.
I have one more clip that I want to show you. I won't play the whole thing, but let me just get it ready here. And back.
Their ancestral roots stretch back more than 13,000 years. They live in hundreds of nations across 2 continents, linked by social and cultural networks. They invent unique systems of science, art, and writing. Built some of the world's largest cities aligned to the stars. And create governments from empires to America's first democracy.
Thomas Jefferson had no idea of what democracy is till he came here.
Native Americans create another world. Then the Europeans arrive.
They tried their best to annihilate us completely.
Native Americans face a deadly crusade to wipe them out.
We're often referred to in history books in the past tense, but we are not dead.
Today they number 50 million across North and South America. They maintain deep ties to their long history in this land.
I can't walk these same lands and be here where my people were without trying to acknowledge their existence.
To fight the forces of conquest, Native Americans tapped 10,000 years of beliefs and traditions. At the intersection of modern scholarship and Native knowledge is a new vision of America and the people who built it. This is Native America.
And what I would suggest is that it was the equivalent of the asteroid that came to kill the dinosaurs. And that kind of an event is something that you cannot simply skip over. Let me get entire script. Okay.
Study history. What's the connection between not taking away arms, the right of the people to keep up, and the militia? It seems very strange. But historical inquiry showed you what the connection is. The way the Stuart kings, the Catholic kings, destroyed the militia, which was supposed to be all of the male citizens trained to arms. The way they destroyed the militia was not by abolishing it. They just took away the arms of all of those who opposed the Catholic kings. And so there is a connection. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the defense of a free state, a militia consisting of all of the body of the citizenry, the right of the people to keep their arms shall not be infringed. It makes thorough sense if you understand the history.
Sorry, but for me, that's not the history and that he's using to support his argument. There's much more that is very significant and does make the Second Amendment make sense. Okay, with that, we can open up for discussion.
Please use the raise your hand function. Sal, you had the part on the Second Amendment where about the militia. Congress trains, disciplines, and arms. Is that an argument that is at odds with what Scalia said?
I'm sorry. That what is that?
Is that okay? It says Congress shall arm, discipline,
right,
and the militia and train the militia. So does that go against what Scalia says? Because until Congress does the arms, where do they get the arms?
Well, yeah, you can basically you had a choice. You could bring your own weapon, but if you didn't have a weapon, the government was responsible for providing you with one. You have a right to a weapon. If you're in the militia, if we're going to ask you to go fight Indians and go put down slave rebellions, then we have an obligation to provide you with a weapon. But it makes no comment about an individual right outside of the militia to have or not have a weapon.
Anybody else raise your hand, and multi-speaker is a good way you can see everybody who's speaking. Anybody have a question or a comment?
Wait a second, I see my friend Ellie out there. Ellie, you must have a question. Ellie's visiting with us today.
Hi, everybody. I don't have a question at this moment, but good morning to everyone.
Okay, good morning.
Yeah.
I think Nancy has something.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, okay, I just raised my hand.
Okay.
I want to point out that that, of course, my sympathies are with the Native Americans and how we have completely wiped out their culture, which was totally unfair. And in retrospect, if we could all look back with good conscience, we would stop that in its tracks and figure out a different way to get along. All right. That said, I want to say that there were, you were mentioning in southern Indiana around 1812 that there was a village there that was wiped out and that people were either dead or disappeared. And that was right around the time of the New Madrid earthquake that crossed about 4 states there in the Midwest. And it was so devastating that it reversed the direction of the Mississippi River. And so I think there's some possibility that the village that you mentioned was a victim of the New Madrid earthquake versus the Native American situation going on at that time. But I just wanted to throw that out because I think that that earthquake was so devastating that it was similar to the comet dropping in the Caribbean that you also mentioned.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Nancy.
Norman?
I'd like to mention, I saw a documentary a couple of days ago called Stamped from the Beginning, which is on Netflix. It's based on a book by Abraham Sendi.
Okay.
And I think you'd like it. I think
Okay.
you would like it. And it's sort of an anti-racist, anti-slavery documentary. It's very, very good.
Great. I'll check it out. Thanks, Norm. But Norman, what do you think about about Scalia's Heller decision?
I think it's a fable. It's that and Dobbs versus Jackson are 2 astonishing decisions, and they're so important to our Constitution, and it has major effects on this country, and it's just wrong. I mean, I was asking a friend of mine, how do you teach in one of the mandatory courses in law school is the U.S. Constitution? And it's, how do you teach it now?
Yeah,
we all flunk.
Yeah, I think Dobbs, also goes back into the 17th century in England and all of that. Here's a thing that I feel needs to be emphasized today is that I've talked about the forces that have been trying to dismantle the American government since the end of World War II and probably before that. Certainly go back to the Articles of Confederation, where they didn't want to. So these forces separate us have been, and we don't want a government. We don't want a federal government. Just let us do what we want to do and everybody get out of the way. And when you allow that to happen in the experiment, in the free market experiment of we have no government, go do what you want to do, we know the results. It resulted in millions of native peoples being slaughtered and killed. It resulted in enslavement of millions of people so that individuals could get rich.
And by the way, I'm also very concerned about birthright citizenship.
Oh, that's gone. We don't. That.
The U.S. Supreme Court could use an historical analysis similar to Dobbs to say it was only intended for freed slaves.
Norm, talking about the 14th Amendment is so 1990. We're into 2025. That's history. We got rid of it this week. Just this past week, we got rid of it. No, of course. But what's important to see is that the forces that are taking over the federal government now are the forces of those people who wanted to tear down the American government. They are now behind the gate. They are now inside the castle.
Well, in fact, they were pardoned. They were pardoned by the president.
Forget Trump. Trump is not important. The Heritage Foundation now occupies the White House. The Federalist Society owns the court. And I think it's important. I know I mentioned it last week, but I'll mention it again. The American Bar Association has something like 1.2 million members. The Federalist Society was organized to counter the ABA. The Federalist Society has maybe 65,000 lawyers. They control 6 seats on the Supreme Court.
Yep.
So it's part of that whole, this is not something that has just emerged from the past election or from 2016. We must see it in a big, and it may be too late. Remember, they are advocating Americans have to get over their dictator phobia. That means they have no intention of Trump leaving at the end of 4 years. People keep thinking, can we survive 4 years? It's not 4 years. Madeline, I'm sorry. I think I think my comments have put you into a catatonic state. No, your screen is frozen. Can you
It's
speak?
frozen?
Okay, there you are. Now
Okay. I wanted to go back to Prophetstown for a minute because that is something that's new to me. And I'm wondering if that was the same time as Tippecanoe. Was it all along that same time, the Battle of Tippecanoe and this destroying of Prophetstown? And I'm sorry, but I missed a little of that. So was that a Shawnee town?
Haudenosaunee town. I believe that was. Well, no, I'm not.
That's the native word for the Iroquois what we have called the Iroquois, right?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. I'll have to look
I
that
think
up.
it could be Shawnee, but it struck me thinking about this that
Madeline, you froze again.
Yeah.
Madeline, we'll come back to you in a second. Joy, do you have something?
Yeah, being slightly nerdish and trying to multitask, I did note at a quick look at the Heller decision how he uses citations. He uses, and this is very nerdish going back to first year law school, but he uses the citation C and C generally for a lot of his citations. C means that the authority considers basic source material supporting an opinion or conclusion via the law of fact drawn in a textual statement. It indicates that the assertion, opinions, or conclusions will be suggested by an examination of the cited authority rather than the opinion or conclusion as stated. C generally is even, and I'm going back literally to my first year law school white book. C generally, which is he also uses, is the cited authority is broader in scope than or develops a question analogous to discussion in the text without lending support to the proposition asserted. So, even his citations don't really support his argument.
Yeah.
Madeline, you unfrozen again.
I'm unfrozen. Okay. Well, first of all, let me just mention that the ABA is not exactly a radical left organization, people. It's very mainstream. So the fact that they no longer vet candidates is kind of ridiculous. But anyway, back to Prophetstown. I'm thinking that over 50 years ago, D. Brown wrote Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee about the Western Indian Wars. Excellent book. If you've never read it, it's still very relevant. But we really haven't had a book about all these tribes. There's a lot about the Trail of Tears, and there's individual books about all kinds of different people in the East. But there's not anything about all the wars in the East like there is in the West. And maybe somebody needs to write a book about all of those, because there's so many that we sometimes, like this Prophetstown thing, I've never even heard of it. And I'm from the Midwest and everything. I never heard of this. So,
You know, really over the past 20 years, historians have been,
starting to look more at this.
that whole thing about Native American history.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of new works that are out there to take a look at. Now, not all of them are going to be on the popular bestsellers list.
Right.
But they will, be in the history milieu. There was I can't remember the name of it now, who won National Book Award just a couple of years. So it's
that guy from Texas, I think. I can't think of his name.
Yeah.
He's a professor, but
out.
Also, I wanted to say that I was in a meeting the other day with two people that I don't know that well, that we were working on something, and I happened to bring up politics, and it became clear that they were both Republican MAGA people. And I don't think in talking to them that they really even knew what all was happening in Washington. And I'm like, but doesn't it concern you that Elon Musk and his little young friends went in and now have all of our data and, from the federal government and hacked it and all that? And they're like, what are you talking? I mean, I don't think they even knew. So I think one of the problems we have to address is that there's such a large group of people, and it's not a majority. Even Trump did not get a majority of the votes. He got enough to win the Electoral College, but he did not get the majority. But
he didn't get over 50%.
But with this misinformation and lack of information, how do you change, how do these people ever change their minds if they don't even know what's happening?
Well, look, I think it's a good point. Mind you, 90 million people who were eligible to vote and registered to vote didn't vote.
Oh, so ridiculous.
So the largest block of vote in the recent presidential election were the people who didn't vote. So
the scary thing now is, when elections come up again, are there even going to be elections?
That's a good question.
That's the,
Well, that's understand when it's like we are witnessing the the takeover of the Reichstag.
Yeah.
We're witnessing it. But it's hard for people to actually believe this is happening.
Right. I believe it, but I know it's hard. I mean, I've seen it happen and I believe it, but I think it is hard for people to think, is this really as bad as it looks? Yes.
Well, but it is, there are people who have been sounding an alarm about what is coming from the Tea Party, the Koch network, all of it, that this was an assault on the American government. We're being attacked from within. We had an insurrection on January 6th. And yet people think, well, but that's no big deal. And they would go, the Supreme Court ruled against the rule of law.
Yeah.
I mean, it is like, this should not be any, I'm not shocked. I mean, I think we have the equivalent of the meteorite hitting the planet and killing all the dinosaurs. There's not going to be an election in 2028. There probably will not be a midterm election.
Good God.
Well, they've already introduced something to give Trump a third term.
Mind you, if I was putting together a plan to dismantle America, I would want a long-term plan. And I would want to be able to say to get a typical Venn diagram. What are the things we have to do to get where we have a dictator? And I would lay out, we've got to take control of the court. We've got to influence the congressional elections where we can take control over it, where we have people who are in the Senate and the House who are our people and march to our tune. We get whatever party we take over, we just get rid of them, we put in our folks. So I want a court, I want the legislature, I want the military, and I want the Justice Department. I would lay that out. They now have that.
Yeah.
And so if I was putting together that plan, I would be doing exactly what they're doing right now. Stop, halt all spending. We're not paying Social Security anymore. We're not paying disabled vets anymore. We are not funding USAID. We're firing the FBI. We're firing the FBI. We're firing the Central Intelligence Agency. It's operational already. It's not theoretical. It's happening.
But we do have Nancy.
Well, I just wanted to comment on Madeline's remark about the lack of history that we have available to read, et cetera, regarding the eastern side of the Mississippi. And I just wanted to make the comment that the French, who were coming down from Quebec through the Great Lakes and down the Mississippi River, established a wonderful bond with all of the Native Americans all the way down the Mississippi. They bonded, they traded, they intermarried, they had kids together, they had a wonderful community. And it was there was no war going on at all between the French Canadians coming from Quebec and the people, the Native Americans living all the way down the Mississippi River. And they knew how to live harmoniously. And at this time, there is a community there that honors the French colonials that came down from Quebec, called at St. Genevieve, Missouri. And it's visited all the time, has a lot of structures.
Nancy, I was just there in October. My parents grew up about 20 miles north of St. John.
Right. That's what I'm talking about then. I'm a member. I joined it. I've only been there a couple of times, but I on trips up there to visit relatives. But I joined at the St. Genevieve community there as a member to keep up on what's going on. I thought it was fabulous. It was a great stop. I hadn't been over there before, and it was a great stop the first time I went, and I've been back a couple of times since. So,
yeah, Nancy, what you're saying about the relationship of the French to the Indians was also the circumstance on what we now know as Nova Scotia until 1755, and to go to I think it's called Grand Pre.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic.
Fort de Chartres. Fort de Chartres is up on.
Yeah, well,
is in Nova Scotia.
The French had a very fine, long-lasting, and very productive relationship with all the Indians in that area, as well as down the Great Lakes and down to the Louisiana territory. And so 1755, I think, was the year when somebody decided they wanted those wonderful farms that the French had built there on Nova Scotia, or that is Arcadia. And so now we have that history that's not been dealt with either. No.
Okay.
Eli?
Go ahead, Ellie.
I just wanted to share something came to my mind. As not American-born American, first time when I learned about Louisiana Purchase and about what Nancy was just talking about, how the French Canadians were living harmoniously with the Native Americans and surviving and trading and flourishing. all of that I learned only by visiting the Arch in St. Louis. There's a museum at the base of it. And it was striking to me, by that point, I have already lived in the US. I've already been a citizen, and I still somehow, even through the US citizenship test, did not learn of the history. So I was completely, what's the right word? Arrogant. Didn't know all of that history. But the reason I raised my hand, I wanted to bring to attention, in Biden's presidency, if there's nothing else he did, but him putting Native American woman in charge of Department of Interior, I think done a lot of good for the Native American. Of course, it's a drop in a bucket, but still, at least if you're not familiar, look up Deb Holland. And
Yeah, she's wonderful.
I hope that, of course, we are not seeing a lot of the work she had done in 4 years. And it would have taken a lot longer to undo the machine that the white males in charge of Department of Interior for decades of the damage that is done. But if you think of Native Americans in and what positive we have done as a country, then think of Deb Holland and Biden putting her in charge of the Department of Interior. And I was so and again, is the word arrogant the right word when you don't know something and you have no idea?
Ignorant.
Ignorant. That's it. Thank you. And mind you, I lived among Native Americans at the Grand Canyon for over a decade. So that would give you an idea that even somebody educated and somebody inquisitive who lives in this country might not be aware of all of the Native American history. And so I would encourage everyone to, whenever you talk to people, whenever you have gatherings, bring up Louisiana Purchase, because then it would bring that up and people might look it up. And I was shocked to find out that Napoleon basically sold the land. And I after that visit to St. Louis, I couldn't help but think, what would have been, we, instead of United States of America, we would have been a big France in a way, and how beautiful that would have been the collaboration between Native Americans and the French, and what this country could have been like. And instead we have what Sal was just describing, where we're heading to. I'm not sure if that helps. I hope that helps.
Good. Thanks, Ellie. Thank you.
Yeah. Got a question. The North America, basically, one of your screens showed the North and South America was filled with Native Americans. Aren't those the same people who are the undocumented Americans coming over today that the Republicans are whining about?
Well, yeah, what you have is like I said, 20,000 years ago came people from Siberia and South Asia, come across the Chukchi Sea that's frozen over with ice, and they then migrate through North America into Central America, into South America. And they are the Native Americans. They walked onto those lands before anybody else inhabited them. And so when you go through the various generations, those that we're considering illegal immigrants are really the native peoples.
The undocumented people.
Right.
Not illegal. Not illegal until you're convicted of something that's undocumented.
Okay. No, I agree. Sure. Let me, I wanted to, I hope I have this right. Just to, I just want to highlight that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has warned Republican colleagues, colleagues in private that the GOP faces a new John Birch Society problem that must be aggressively purged. Remember, Charles Koch, their father, was a founding member of the John Birch Society. And when I talk about that cabal that formed end of World War II, it's, you know, put under the umbrella of John Birch and others that kind of morphed together with that. And so even someone like Mitch McConnell recognizes this force, and it's this force that has taken over the Republican Party and pushed Republicans out of it. Okay. Anything else?
You want to give us a little bit about next week?
What are we doing next week? Let me see. We're going to get into the decision next week and start to try to pick apart, you know, specific words in his decision. And I want to, out of this class, I want you to feel that we've navigated through all of Heller, and I can give you what my commentary is, and you can comment on it as well. So, and we'll also hear from a very esteemed historian about what happens when the legal conducts historical research, the difference between the two.
So let's give everybody, Sal, a warm applause for a very sobering presentation. Again.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming. I hope this has been fun.
Oh, it's depressing as hell.
Off to the liquor cabinet.
I want to encourage all of you to watch an episode of Law and Order this afternoon. So, you know, because everything works out in the end. Guys win, the bad guy. Adam Schiff is there to give you the sense that there's an adult in control. Do not watch the news. It's not going to help you any. Try and find that condo in the Wyoming mountainside where you'll hide soon.
Eli, you have something else?
Ellie.
It's Ellie.
Ellie, I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. Thank you. I forgot to mention there is a TV channel. I think it's called FX, and it's Native Americans, and it's from today's world, from the 2025, and it shows wonderful programs on how Native Americans are integrating, how they're fighting, how they're building their institutions and trying to stay not only afloat, but also flourish. So maybe it will help a lot of us to learn about those programs and support them in that way too.
Eli, is that FX, like Fox X, or SX?
F as in Frank, and
Frank.
X as in X-ray.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And, you know, as they said in that PBS piece, the population has grown back to 50 million people. Keep in mind, when the Europeans came into the New World, the estimates are 140 million people. Perspective on, you know, what exactly happened. Huge catastrophe. But the key point, though, of all of it, we talked about the slavery last week, talked about Native Americans this week. Both of them are very big events. They don't appear in Scalia's historical research.
Sal, do we know the population of Native Americans currently?
50 million is the, we're talking about across North America, Central America, South America. 50 million is the estimate.
Fine.
Okay, everyone. Well, please be safe out there. We'll see you all next week. You know, next week as we get into the decision, I really have to apologize because, you know, that's not going to be the most exciting. It's going to be a lot of reading the words and doing that. But I think it's important.
Parsing it apart. Okay.